Hi, I'm James Howes. I'm the Chief Strategist for the team and I'm here to talk to you about the Singapore Grand Prix. What another incredible Grand Prix. Safety car came out early on when Esteban tried to go for a move around the outside of his teammate, got squeezed against the wall and his car had to be recovered. From then onwards, after the restart, you would have seen Lewis managing his pace on those delicate hypersoft tyres and then slowly pulling away with the Ferrari and the Red Bull following him. Vettel went for the aggressive undercut on lap 14, opening the sequence of stops, taking the ultra-soft tyre. He wasn't able to make it, he got caught up with Perez in the outlap. Lewis was able to cover. One lap later, took the soft tyre. Verstappen followed several laps later in an incredible moment when both Verstappen and Vettel were going round turn 2 together. Valtteri did a very similar programme, defending his position to Kimi, and from then onwards, the drivers were managing that car on a knife edge. It's an extremely difficult track and had to take those tyres a long, long way, all of them doing the job that they needed to do, and in the end, Lewis walking away with the victory. Hi Ming, thank you for your question which came via Instagram, and it was around running the ultra-soft tyre in Q1. There's a finite allocation of tyres available to you in qualifying. In our case, and Red Bull and Ferrari, we only had 4 sets of Hypersoft available. It's an incredibly precious commodity. It's a very fast tyre. And really in a track that's all about qualifying, you want to make sure that you maximise them all in a row. And that typically means 2 runs in qualifying 2, one after the other, and 2 runs in qualifying 3, one after the other. So you have to run an ultra-soft somewhere. In the case of Ferrari, they tried to run it in Q2 and qualify on it. But even if they didn't do that, it means that they can use the improving track and run the Hypersoft towards the end of it. In our case, we ran it in Q1. And we were aware there were some risks. It was closer than we had expected it to be, but ultimately both drivers made it through and it allowed them from then onwards to do a very good program on Hypersofts. Silva, thank you for your question which came via Twitter, and it was around how Lewis drove the first stint of the race, the management and how to work the Hypersoft. That first stint was really the reason why Lewis walked away with an incredible victory, and he drove it perfectly. He started with a lot of management. It was reasonably slow lap times to start, making sure there was always traffic in what we call the pit window, so cars behind just couldn't stop. Then he built the pace up very gradually and was able to pull away from the leaders behind. And what it meant is that by the time we got towards lap 14, whilst Vettel could stop, he still had a little bit of traffic there, but Lewis's tyres were in a fantastic condition and he could just nail in the purple lap times, the fastest lap times, and come in 1 lap later in a really good state relative to Sebastian. Hi Osman, thank you for your question which came via Twitter, and it was about what would we have done if there was a safety car towards the end of the race. Without question, the soft tyre would have provided a little bit more protection than, say, Vettel's ultra soft, but ultimately a car on brand new Hypersofts at the end of the race probably would have had the performance to get through. And there's a little bit of evidence of that. Magnussen, for example, set the fastest lap of the race at 41, 1 minute 41, quite a bit faster than the pace that Lewis was running at. Now it's difficult to overtake at Singapore, but a very heavily worn soft tyre would probably not stand a chance. So to answer your question, it depends on what lap we look at, but it's highly likely that we would have stopped Lewis towards the end of the race and fitted fresh Hypersoft tyres, even at the cost of boxing out of the lead of the race. Hi Chen, thank you for your question which came via Twitter, and it was around, it looked like it might have been raining at some point in the race, and what were our thoughts and were we ready to switch to Inter tyres or expert tyres? So let's answer those individually. Was it raining? We're not sure. There was a little bit of light drizzle, and I really do mean a little bit in the pit lane, but looking at the TV images you would have said it was almost a waterfall. Maybe that was a waterfall. There was nowhere near sufficient amounts of rain though to cause concern. There was nothing appearing on the radar. But irrespective, to answer the second part of that, we always have both intermediate tyres and expert tyres available, and we can make a call for the car to come in within seconds and have either one of those specifications fitted. As it turned out in Singapore, it really was just a mild amount of spray and it disappeared very, very quickly. Hi Kate, thanks for your question which came via Instagram, and it was around why Valtteri towards the end of the race suffered against Hülkenberg and wasn't able to overtake. Hülkenberg was a backmarker car. He'd already been lapped by the leaders, he was 1 lap down, and he wasn't directly racing Valtteri and he wasn't racing any cars in front of him. The way the rules work in Formula 1 is you need to get around about a second behind the car in order for the blue flag system to trigger. A blue flag would be indicated in this case to Hülkenberg, and Hülkenberg would have to concede the position and let Valtteri through. Valtteri was really struggling to get that close to the car for a sustained period of time. Singapore is one of the more difficult tracks. There's a long section of corners where it's very difficult to sustain that distance without hurting your tyres for a dramatic period of time. And Valtteri was very much trying to get in front of him whilst not losing the position to Kimi behind, and it was a fine balance. In the end, we were just unable to sustain that distance behind Hulkenberg, and Valtteri was able to hold the position against Kimi, so he held station there. John, thanks for your question, which came via Twitter, and it was around how difficult it was for the power unit and keeping it cool at somewhere like Singapore. So the ambient was around 29-30 degrees in most sessions at Singapore, and it's fortunate it's a night race. The track temperature at around about 32 to 34 degrees, something in that ballpark. And in reality, we actually run at far hotter temperatures elsewhere. For example, Bahrain during the day, where we run in FP1 and FP3. So it's not so much that the temperatures are extreme. What makes it very difficult for a human is the very high level of humidity, which doesn't affect the car as much. What really causes the issue in Singapore, though, is the fact that you're all following each other in traffic. You're near enough always in a situation where you've got cars in front of you disrupting the airflow. At somewhere like Monza, you can pull left or pull right in order to get clean, fresh air into your radiators, but that's just simply not as easy to do in Singapore, and that's what causes the difficulty. What we have is we have a range of bodywork options that allow more or less cooling to go into the radiators at the cost of some performance, and you simply just tune what you need in order to get through the race. Thank you very much for all of your questions. It's been an absolute pleasure answering them. It's quite interesting to see that the way you think about the race and see the race and ask questions is very similar to what we're doing internally and how we saw the race too. We look forward to answering your questions for the Russian Grand Prix.